There we go.
Good.
Yeah.
Hello?
Right, so.
I hadn't heard.
I think Anthony had it. Richard, can you, Paul Feinberg's calling here.
Okay,
Can you send him a Zoom link?
yep, what's his email?
Paul, what's your email? Let me, I might have it. I have it probably right in front of me.
It's on our town website. If he goes to the calendar, you can click right on the link.
Paul, if you go to the calendar on the town website, you can click right on the link.
Today's date.
Yeah.
It's on today's date.
Yeah.
Call if you can't get
Yeah, it
in.
might be an eventual candidate
Yeah.
for some of that. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, it's,
You have to multiply.
Seriously,
it.
a long time to see.
yeah, it's awesome. You say what it's green.
Right.
Right now.
Yeah.
We can do it again tomorrow night, and then a week from then.
To make it work.
I was thinking it was Monday, but it's Monday.
Yes.
It's working good. You know, it's growing.
I got that.
Texas as well. We didn't find one.
Plant
You used to live in Texas, I live in Texas now.
I think it would be better.
Right,
if you don't,
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Didn't ask on
Yeah.
me. I've never met the guy, other than.
Almost
we're just waiting.
Wait on Paul.
Wait on Paul.
Okay. I'll tell you when I see him arrive.
Even though you try.
Right.
Doesn't look it. Not with a mask on.
Inevitably, yeah, there's stuff all over his fragments. So
Paul, did you get on okay?
One sister in high school and the other two.
To 3.7.
And they wanted to have some.
7 miles. Yeah. And so we'll.
Sounds like that's what we're gonna do.
Right.
Right.
So what's figured the cost of this burlap to put down there to do it? Just as a, just to get a sense of the size.
Yeah.
Not getting in?
Yeah,
That's a lot.
Nobody
That's
even
just-
called me.
that's
I-
just material.
To this day, I've never had one
How's your
call
showing?
from me
Oh,
saying,
okay.
what happened down there, or have you seen it, or any of that.
Yeah.
And how.
There he is.
Believe it, like.
Okay, you're in.
You know, I found it, the longer could be down.
Right.
Okay, he's
Has
in.
trees where there's water. And I said, you don't look bad. Well, what about all this? He's like, I would always.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order our meeting. And first, I'd like to thank our guests for coming. It is, we're gonna talk about shoreland zoning. We have Richard Greenwald, our code enforcement officer, Belgrade CEO, Andrew Marble, Rome CEO, and do we have David Savage?
He's not here.
David Savage couldn't be. I have in attendance for our quorum, Mike Barrett, Lenny Reich, Pat Donahue, Mike Carino, and Paul Feinberg's on Zoom. Our first order of business is a discussion of the shoreline code enforcement officer with our two CEOs. Pretty much what the Lakes Committee, just to start us off with, is we're a standing committee in Belgrade which researches and discusses issues and concerns and other matters that impact the community's greatest natural resource, our lakes. It's kind of a broad, wide-ranging thing from what we're gonna, speak about today in code enforcement officer and code enforcement to, we looked at this, helping with the planning board on the cell tower ordinance. So we kind of, as things come up, we did the docks and the mooring ordinance was our initial beginning. So we talked a bit about at the meeting last month about roads, runoff into roads, especially on town properties that are, putting a lot of dirt in the lake, such as town parks and culverts that need replacement. So it's kind of we don't have any one specific thing. We kind of take them as we see them and things come up, which they always do. So we're kind of always in a growth mode here. So I think the best we could start with, if Richard, could you talk about a little bit about Belgrade shoreline enforcement, what you focus on, what you see some issues are, and what the town could do better to help you.
Right now, everybody's getting the docks in, and so that's an issue right now. It seems to be people's docks are encroaching, if you will, upon other people's property in the water. And as Andy and I just talked, we kind of don't have jurisdiction of the water. So what I've been trying to tell people is, if your pin is here, put your dock on your side.
Yeah.
Maintain your distance, be respectful, but there is nothing in writing to help me enforce that. And so I think that eventually, after we get done the commercial solar ordinance, we're gonna hopefully come up with a dock ordinance or combine it with the more ordinance to specify docks as well. There's already a legal battle going on, and one of the persons don't even have their dock in yet, so. Then there's another one that's encroaching upon another one's property. If you look at their pin, it's straight out, and it kind of goes like this. And so that sort of thing I'm dealing with right now, along with tree cutting. A lot of people want to cut trees near the water for various purposes, whether it be the trees leaning on their cabin, or the tree's dead, or their arborist deems it's a danger. So as far as, I don't think I need help there. That's just kind of a prevalent issue that's going on right now in shoreland. And I think probably the other one is just illegal building and doing things, putting up sheds illegally, things of that nature, which part of the problem is that I don't have the time to get there and to do a site survey on all the places that I really like to be. So as Andy and I have talked briefly in the past, we really should have more hours so we can be more effective at our jobs and doing site evaluations and follow-ups. So that's kind of where Belgrade stands right now.
I've got a couple of questions and that kind of, especially on the shoreline zoning, when a application gets approved, and then you receive the whatever that was approved plans or whatever the scope of work was. I think in the past, we didn't have great documentation on what was done, before pictures or really capturing what is there before someone started cutting trees or doing site work. It kind of, we were there after it was done. Do you think, and maybe the committee can weigh in on this, and Andy Marvel too as well. Do you think that's important that know what's there at the beginning, so you don't come into something that's already been maybe incorrectly trees cut, earth moved?
Well, and Andy spoke at the last meeting about how he marks trees.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna do the same thing, except I think we must come up with a stencil so that if I use Kubota orange, anybody can just go out, use Kubota orange, an example to cut a tree. So Sarah had mentioned at the planning board meeting last week that a stencil would be good.
Yeah.
Something specific to myself. So I'm gonna take Andy's reference on that and run with it and go with that as far as the trees go. But as far as getting down there and actually taking a picture of everybody's property, it's just, I don't see it in the time card, if you will. I think it would be helpful. I rely a lot on the assessor's cards and what's in there. An example, we had a shed that was too close, a brand new shed too close to the water for one. And when I cited these people and sent them a letter, their response was, well, we had a shed and we just replaced it. Well, the issue was they had a 7x5 shed and now they have an 8x10 shed. And the 7x5 was nowhere as close to the water as what it's now. So I use the assessor's card. Honestly, I just don't feel like I have time to go take a picture every time that I hand a permit. Board gives a permit. I don't know how, Andy, how you feel about
This is a huge issue, and I mean, it's hard to sum it up briefly.
No,
but-
don't, we got time. This is our main, you guys are the ones we're here
Yeah,
for.
so, like many regulations, time is imperative as far as when a structure went in or when a property was developed. So back in, shoreline zoning came about in the mid to late 70s, but it got changed substantially back in 1989. And that is like a point set in time where We like to think that if it's prior to 1989, it's grandfathered, because in 1989, there was a lot of changes. One of the big ones being, that's when they went from a 75-foot setback to a 100-foot setback for all structures. So anytime somebody has something that is closer to the water, a lot of times, oh, that is grandfathered, and you hear that word a lot. And if it was prior to 1989, the chances are it very well could be grandfathered. Anything after 1989, period, is supposed to be 100 feet back from the water for a structure. So knowing what was there in 1989 was probably super easy in 1990 and 1991, but we're
Yeah.
30 years after that now, and determining what was really there in 89 versus what was there in 1999, still 23 years ago, it's impossible to figure out at this point. As we get further away from that 1989 threshold, it becomes harder and harder. So that's where having pictures set in stone that you can refer back to. And so that happened back in 2010, 2011 with, I think it was back then as BRCA in partnership with Colby.
They
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
Colby and BRCA.
they photographed the whole shore.
Exactly,
From-
every
from
single
the
one of
lake.
Belgrade Lakes. And so not only we've lost a little bit of that data, unfortunately. So they changed the platform that information is on online. It used to be really slick because it was tied with a GPS point to Google Earth. So you could sit there and figure out every
Yeah.
single place on the lake. Now you have to be familiar, because now it just lists them all the pictures. So you have to, like, oh, I know that camp. I need to be 6 down from that. And you scroll down through the pictures and find them. I use that all the time.
So it's still good.
It's still good. It's not as good as it could be, because again, so they took these from a boat riding along the shoreline in the middle of summer. So you got foliage, which is good to see what you had for vegetation, but if you're looking at structures, you can't see much because you got foliage in the way. You're sitting 50 feet or 100 feet out in the water, depending on what the rocks were like, so you got to drive around. So I use those all the time. That was done in 2010, 2011. We're 10 years past that now. Trees die naturally, things change.
Mhm.
It's time that needs to get redone. And with technology now, it can be done so much easier, because you do the whole thing with a drone now. You could
Yeah.
fly a drone around the lakes. You could do one in the summer to check foliage, one in the fall or winter to check structures, pre-snow or after snow melts, and have 2 sets and give yourself another date in time where you can verify what was there. So you can refer back to it when someone says, oh no, that's grandfathered, they've been there forever. Because after 10 or 12 years of the structure sitting there, it does look like it's been there forever. It's hard to tell the difference between a well-maintained 50-year-old structure or a really crappily maintained 10-year-old structure. They look the same.
Plus the
So-
tree cover, you could tell.
Right, yeah, so that's huge.
You ever get out, well, of course, the first year, good weather's coming up, survey from the water?
No, I haven't actually. I was just speaking to Mary. I haven't even been sworn in as a harbor master.
Well, you're sworn in as the code enforcement.
Right.
You can survey, what I'm thinking is you can generally, other than the instances that Andy mentioned, you can generally see something that looks like new construction from the water. You've got a boat, you know you have a boat available.
I do.
It seems to me that'd be worthwhile, a nice day like this, I think it's the worst place to be anyway.
Yeah.
But you can cover a lot of territory, in the morning or an afternoon, and just see what's out there. You go and you can tell a lot of places that are new.
I agree. And I was talking to Mary about it, and that's something I'd certainly like to do, especially on a day like this, like you said.
Yeah.
That
Wouldn't
gets
hurt
into-
my feelings.
You get into a time thing. You just, so I work 2 days a week in Rome. Sitting on a boat sounds like a ton of fun. I love to do it. Realistically, no way would I have time to do that.
I don't want you surveying my property.
Thank God, are too
Talking
late.
about Belgrade now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do it every day. One morning a month, you could pick up a lot, I think.
If time allowed, huge. I think it's absolutely important. It's just that you get back to where's your time best spent? And I can tell you that whenever I have free time, you go out and start doing window inspections, you always find violations. Like, it's not a matter of like, we might gonna find you today, you always find them. And then you just prioritize what is actually like a legitimate violation and what is somebody replacing decking on a deck down by the water that should have gotten a permit, but it doesn't look like it's any bigger. I'm not gonna worry about it at the moment. So, but yeah, you're spot on. You can spot a whole bunch of stuff from the water. I don't have a boat in Rome, But when the lake freeze over, a lot of times I bring my hockey skates in, you can hockey skate down the ice. And it's- you can cover some ground on that and see some stuff as well, so.
You said a window? do a
Window inspection, just means you drive around with your.
Drive around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. So that's what I thought.
No, not peeking through people's windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you get arrested, right? No, no, people don't like that as much. Yeah.
What, I have one more question.
Yes.
What kind of support are you getting from the select board?
I don't deal with select board all too much. I know that Ricky took me out for a survey for a sewer system, and he's extended his hand, and so is Dan Newman. But generally, I just deal with the planning board.
Well, when you start finding violations, you'll be dealing with stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found a few and I'm addressing them. And so far, it's going well. We're getting into the dock season, and that's what I was saying, these issues of docks are coming up at moorings.
What are some of the dock issues that are coming up? I mean, you explained the one, people put them at an angle.
Yeah, that's primarily-
Is that the big one?
That is.
What are some of the other things?
Moorings as well, being in front of other people's property.
Yeah.
Within 200 feet.
Yeah.
And so those are the two things that I've been dealing with
So,
lately.
like, until the mooring ordinance was passed, there wasn't anything you could have done about that, right?
I wouldn't imagine, I'm
Yeah.
new, so, but I
Against
was,
the law, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, well, I was
Yeah.
thinking, that's why that was one of the reasons why I put some effort.
We're finding
Right.
out we might see laws enforcement.
We don't see where I am, we just don't see that.
yeah,
People plopping moorings in front of other folks' houses. But we have had neighbors complain that the person's moorings in front of their place, but they're both blocking their view.
yeah.
Blocking the view.
I just wanted to know because some of that petty type stuff that isn't enforceable, I don't think it should be absorbing a lot of your time. You know what I mean? So you gotta
agree.
filter through all of that type of stuff before you get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the mooring ordinance, it does state that your mooring is supposed to be adjacent to your property. So that can be enforced if it's not adjacent to your property. And the one in particular that I'm speaking of was like in the middle of the neighbor's property, because in front of their property, they don't have any place to put a mooring. They got a little marsh. And so there's no, and the dock as well, the dock kind of has to go at an angle, or else it has to somehow go over the marsh and into the water, it's kind of a weird situation, but once again, there is no dock ordinance in place, so.
Part of the problem with mooring is that the boat, it's on the mooring, can weather vane around, so mooring is okay. Boat weather vanes around, and then it's blocking the neighbor's view, perhaps, what do you, I don't know what you can do about that.
Good question. This particular mooring has been there since last year, and it was definitely in front of the neighbor's property, so middle.
One of the things that got that ordinance started, or the research on that mooring was the fear that people were gonna come in and anchor houseboats and boats that could be lived on.
Mhm.
And that, a lot of people were upset that they didn't want that, well, I don't want that off my dock, people living out there. And it's morphed into what it is now. I don't think we've had any instances of that type of boat,
Yeah, not that I know
not since we started yammering about it.
of.
Didn't that come from up in Rangeley? That was an issue. They had a houseboat up in Rangeley and they
Yeah.
had the
Down
newspaper
south,
and.
there's some down south in Sebago.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, I think that one of the concerns way back in the beginning, just for like institutional history here, is there's a couple of, I'm gonna just call them Airbnbs in air quotes, with boats. So you can Airbnb somebody's houseboat, and you're not just going and anchoring up where they're out of the winds in front of people's houses. Recently, was when Saga, I think, and it was talking about like that happening down in Sebago, and so it got a little traction. And we wanted to try to get ahead of that. I think that was one of the reasons why.
You could also, take, if we didn't have it, you could have taken the 24, 30-foot houseboat and put it on your own dock. Rented it out, used it, so you really got another dwelling unit right there. So that was, there was a lot of
How are they handling septic?
On houseboats.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an issue too. You know,
One of the biggest reasons.
that was a big reason. It was,
Well, it seems like you could attack it with the subsurface wastewater regulations as well. Like there's already regulations on the books that says that if you have a facility that produces wastewater, you need a legal way of dealing with that wastewater.
So it's illegal to discharge into the public water.
Overboard discharge, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it was just, it was those kind of two things, a quality of life issue. If your neighbor suddenly has a giant boat next to you on a 100-foot lot away from you, it's like they're partying there, they're renting it by the week or.
So because we don't have a mooring ordinance, I'm just curious, what's the difference between a mooring and anchoring? Like if you threw an anchor overnight?
That question came up.
So what is the answer to that though?
I think what they said basically is more is permanent, at least with season permanent.
You throw a big enough anchor on a houseboat and they can still do it.
Well, I know people that use an anchor for more, but it's there all the time. They don't take it out.
I think it doesn't the wording say moor or anchor.
Yeah, it specifies it.
It says both those words.
Our ordinance is specifically, the ordinance has two different parts. One is about moorings per se, and one is about houseboats per se. And those two are two different things.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
I maintain it.
And so houseboats are defined in a certain way in terms of.
Just like a boat for overnight occupancy or something like that.
Yeah, well, with flat decks, and we spent a lot of time in trying to figure out exactly how to define them, as opposed to little cabin cruisers that people might actually use and around the lakes. Because we didn't want to prevent people from using those. People did want to stop little houseboats.
It's more like something that really people designed to be living in.
Right.
Yes.
So just for the record, in terms of learn what is the overflow of your work, in terms of priorities, how do you start tackling each thing? What's the list of priorities? That overflow comes in the bottom or how that works?
Well, I think it's a matter of which one is most important in the sense of a danger either to the community or to the waters, something like that. So if I got dating on the shoreline and a mooring issue, I'm gonna go to the dating on the shoreline first. So, and as far as mooring issues go, I mean, I don't really put them as high priority in front of shoreline zoning applications. So it's a balancing act. And once again, I particularly prefer to take on the stuff that's more of a danger to the water or pollutant, something like that, rather than a mooring thing that can wait a little while.
So we first safety environment first,
Yes.
and then we'll have permits. Second, third,
Yeah, second.
and last will be the moorings.
Yes, because, the couple mooring or issues that I've had, the one that I mentioned earlier was the big one that was really directly in front of the person's property, so it was an obvious violation. The other one was kind of it's close to the line. So, yeah, I think that's packing.
So with the kind of work, the volume of work you have right now, how you envision tackling all of it out? What will be a reasonable amount of time to tackle quickly? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days?
I think it
5
depends on
days.
how many things I have on my plate, and then, there's phone calls all day long, there's questions all day long. Cell phone, regular phone, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure Andy's just as busy. Everybody's starting construction, people want to come in and discuss their plans. I want to see if they can get their building permit, if it's non-shoreland. So I sit down with them and go through plans. That's almost a daily event nowadays, now that the weather's gotten nicer. Most generally, every day, I'm sitting down with somebody and going over some sort of plan. Or I'm getting ready for the planning board packet and deciding which permits are gonna go up to the planning board this week, things like that. So, I mean, there's so many things that we do that a lot of people just don't see. I'm, addressing, I was just out addressing earlier for, I think it's your nephew or relative Chance.
Oh, God.
So I did some addressing for him.
Everyone gets related to.
What
So-
do you mean by that?
So he does not have an address. He's putting up a garage and a house, which he has a permit for, well, a dwelling upstairs from the garage. And there's no address there on Castle Island Road. So I have to go out and do the addressing. I have to walk with a meter stick and see how far it is, and every 50 feet's the number. And I come in and put it in the system correctly.
That's part of your duties now.
Yes, it is.
You won't be able to get cable or any of that, those utilities until you have that address from there. I've been through it recently. So it's a very important part. One of the things that came up at that meeting we had last month was the idea of a full-time code enforcement officer for the, I wouldn't say the whole Belgrade Lakes, but maybe,
We're talking interlocal agreement.
Yes. but this was like, I think Anthony, was thinking of, one that worked for the Seven Lakes Alliance that would represent all the towns in that.
I wouldn't be, I mean, in favor of the local agreement, but working for the municipality. Not a private.
That'd be my idea too, because then you're kind of,
I don't think they could work for a private,
Couldn't be effective.
well, not just not effective, but you wouldn't have the authority. The municipality is the one that has the authority. So I think they could maybe work with Seven Lakes Alliance, but they would have to be basically a deputy code officer in all of the towns. So they have a municipal placement, but maybe their main office is out of Seven Lakes, or they work hand in hand with Seven Lakes, but they wouldn't be employed by Seven Lakes. They'd be employed by the towns.
Exactly.
So, in order to have the authority to do the job in the first place. So Anthony had contacted me back after Dave Ford passed away, specifically about an interlocal agreement to see if I wanted to have a full-time position to work for Belgrade and Rome. And it unfortunately didn't work out for my schedule, just because I'm also the code officer in Smithfield, and then I'm the plumbing inspector in 5 other towns as well. And I would just basically have to ditch everything. And to tell you the truth, the other reason is in the summertime, I know at 2 days a week in Rome, and Belgrade is triple the population of Rome and more shoreline. I don't think 3 days is enough in Belgrade. I don't want to do a job that I can't do correctly.
Yeah.
And 2 days in Rome and 3 days in Belgrade, as Richard just pointed out, you're not just doing shoreline. There's 1,000 other things that code officers have to do. Junkyards, subdivisions, E91 addressing, FEMA floodplain. There's all this stuff, and shoreline is a piece of it. And that's really why I said thanks, but no thanks. I am a huge fan of having a full-time code officer that just does lakes, because you will have continuity around all these lakes. Part of that means you're gonna have to get all of these towns on board with similar ordinances. So it doesn't mean they have to be identical, but you don't wanna have to be using a completely separate set of rules for one town versus the other. Now, we already have a chapter 1000 guidelines from DEP, so you do have a somewhat level playing field to start with. Most towns could be slightly more restrictive than that, or they can be way more restrictive if they want to be, but most of them just basically adopt those chapter 1000 guidelines. But we want to match up those 2 ordinances or 3 ordinances, whatever towns are involved, and make sure that the vast majority of things are equivalent in both the towns. And then you could have one code officer that works collaboratively with he's like the deputy, and he works with the other code officers in that town to say, hey, this is a shoreland issue that I discovered. This is what I think needs to happen, or however it would play out. I don't know how you would divvy those up. But if you look at any larger town around here, they all have multiple code officers. It's not like, if you go to like Brunswick, they have a building code officer, they have a code officer for land use. It's divvying up work is not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel with this thing. It's already done elsewhere. So.
yeah, when I lived in Scarborough, they had 5.
Exactly. Farmington is, not that much bigger than these towns when you factor in the summer folks that we have, and they've got 3 in their code office there. So I mean, it's not rocket science.
It seems like at the minimum would be a full-time position for one.
I think so. Obviously, the wintertime, it's
It's a
gonna
little
be
slow.
much slower, but in the summertime, you're right out straight. So,
I would guess the winter time, a lot of folks approaching permits to build or whatever in the spring.
So spring and fall are really busy. It's funny, within the code world, as far as shoreline zoning goes, like January, really slow, December, pretty slow, and then also in like July is really slow. Everyone's at their camp, they don't want to do anything. But then, like April, May, June, super busy. Right now is like the busiest. And then, again, like September, October, after everyone leaves, all the contractors come in because they can work on camps together. So,
What you're saying is true about the multiple code enforcement officers, but the reality is this is Belgrade.
And
And
that's,
it's gonna be hard to get back to what I'm saying about support. I don't see the current select board going along with that.
No.
They don't like to spend money.
but maybe more money for, more time for our own code
At the very
enforcement.
least, at the very least, they could do that. And I'd be willing to support that. And I'd like to see the main tax committee support that.
Yeah.
But as far as getting you, a deputy or something, see if you work that way, Andy.
Right. I'm also gonna start in Monmouth on Monday, so I'll be working Monmouth and Belgrade. So like Andy, he's all over the place.
Did we know that when we hired you?
But,
Did
pardon?
we know that when we hired you?
I don't know. No, because I didn't know it. I didn't know it until a couple weeks ago.
Richard, you've accepted this position? This is Paul Feinberg. Have you accepted this position, Richard, in Monmouth?
Yeah, just on Mondays, maybe Fridays, which are the days I do not work in Belgrade.
So as a practical matter, the question before us to extend the hours is not possible with you.
Well, it doesn't seem like they're going to get extended. I've been asking since I started and nobody wants to extend them. So in order for me to make a living, I have to go elsewhere.
I understand that.
Doing it. It's just that, well, let me ask you, if we were able to get it extended to full time, would you take it or you still want to split?
No, I'd consider it. It's just that I've heard no real talk from anybody, no selectmen or anybody about getting more hours. And so, like I said, with gas at $4.25 a gallon, I gotta do something.
One of the questions I had, Pat,
Oh,
and maybe Charlie can answer this, is that,
yeah, Mike's got the floor now, then Paul. Okay, Mike.
okay,
I'm just curious if anybody has made a request, has it come up before the select board?
I don't know. I've requested it from Anthony and the answer was no. I don't know whether it went to the select board. I use chain of command.
Yeah.
I believe that's important. And so I'm not gonna jump the chain of command.
Well,
It's good for us to hear, what's going on with that. Paul, you have something?
yeah, when, this is probably just a very novel idea, but at our BLA meeting yesterday, I understood that I guess it's 7LA is trying to hire an erosion control manager, and that's a vacancy at this time. Is that right, Charlie Bader?
Yes.
And how long is that a full-time job? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And what does an erosion control manager do vis-a-vis enforcement of shoreline zoning?
No, they wouldn't be doing any enforcement. That's the code enforcement officers. They'd be running grant programs, overseeing all the erosion work that we do.
Because the problem that, and I talked to Andy, and thank you very much for coming today, Andy. Apologize that I couldn't be there in person. My partner is, I'm doing some nursing here. Is we've done a lot of survey work, both on Great Pond and Long Pond. And as a result of this, we've come up with grading sites that have high, low, and high, medium, and low impact. And that we have not been effective in getting property owners to respond. And the question is, to what degree some of these erosion issues are illegal? And we could send notices that they're not correct. But legal notice.
Any of, Andy, you've had a lot of experience in shoreline zone.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the site. Some of them very well could be illegal. I was talking to Paul at the meeting a couple weeks ago about this. So if you look at the erosion and sediment control law, which is a state statute that we have actually, but it gives enforcement ability. Primary enforcement ability falls on DEP, secondary enforcement ability falls on municipalities. So we can enforce the erosion and sediment control law. And it says that if you were causing any work on your property is causing loose soil conditions, that soil cannot migrate off of your property. So that's where silt fences and all that stuff comes in. So a lot of the issues with that lake assessment that they did were erosion issues from things like driveways or lawns that had beaches in front of them and it went right down the water. So the erosion and sediment control law would come into effect if there was active work being done on that, like they had just put in a new driveway and never stabilized it properly and the edges were washing up. But if it's been there for 30 years or 20 years and it just is a poor design, I don't think erosion and sediment control law would do anything for that. So it's not really an enforcement issue. So there may be some out there. Something else I was talking to him about is maybe it's illegal to start with. So like we started off this meeting talking about having a basis to work from to figure out what was legitimately there and what was not. There's people that put in new parking areas and new driveways all the time, and it just happens like cover of darkness, so to speak, and there's no record of it. So you might go down there and say, geez, this house got built in 2003. Here's my plan to show the driveways over here. Now it's sitting over here and it's a straight shot. This never got approved in the first place.
Yeah.
So that could be an issue because again, once you work within the shoreline zone, within 250 feet of these resources, a lot of items need to get permitted. New driveways, new parking areas, new structures, all that stuff.
Lot coverage, everything, yeah.
And again, so if you look back, I don't know how Belgrade is. If you look through the permitting file in Rome, prior to like 1998, good luck finding anything. There was no paperwork for anything. But from basically 99 on, they did a pretty good job. If there was a permit issued, it's in the file. And if there was no permit issues, there was never an application submitted to get one. So if you can look at some of these sites and figure out whether they're legally existing in the first place, that could be one way to tackle it enforcement wise. If it's just been there forever and it's just a poor design, that doesn't really fall on code enforcement. That would be more of a voluntary compliance. What can we do to get them to want to fix it?
Yeah. Yes, Mike.
We could provide a notice that say, you and I talked about, that says that they may be in violation.
Yeah, so I mean, I try not to use that much. It's actually what I was talking to Richard about earlier, where with the dock thing, once you get into the water, you know, I can't really threaten people with legal action if their dock heads off at a 45-degree angle once it hits the water and heads over in front of their neighbor's property. But you can say, well, just so you know, you need to have it stay within your bounds. If they ever challenge you legally, you would lose, and it's not something that I do very often. But if you sent someone a letter from the code enforcement on official town letterhead that said, it's been noticed that you have an erosion issue on your property, and this needs to get corrected to avoid any further complications, or you could be vague about it and just scare them into saying, "Geez, I don't want the town on my rear end about this. Let's do something to fix it." It's not something I throw around because I don't want to like lose the power of what the code, enforcement can do. But if it helps get a bad problem solved, it's not necessarily the worst.
Yeah,
way to
because I
proceed.
think most of these sites are rated, like one is, red zone, you gotta get this done, 2, 3,
Right. Again, I would not lead with that, but if that's like the last case resort, it might be worth trying. Voluntary compliance on stuff like that is always better.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, Mike.
So the conversation topic that we're having right now is a little concerned. And I'll tell you what. When we did our watershed survey, it was explained to the property owners that we're doing this survey to identify, runoff and all of that, but that it's not illegal. We're not gonna
Right.
fine people. We're not gonna chase you down. We're not sticking DIDP on you, et cetera, because you need community buy-in to fix this problem. Now, right, we're hearing, well, we could send a letter from the code enforcement officer, municipality or whatever, that to me is a very fine line that borderlines on trust.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Personally, and I'm not president of Lake Association, so I don't really have to worry about it. But I would not be in favor of that approach unless it was something really bad. Septic system flowing away, or something like that.
Well, that you can handle.
Right,
But I mean, it really would be bad roads or driveways is all it would be.
the only entity or person that we wanted to put the heat on, to be honest, behind closed doors was the town. Make sure that our town roads are better, you know what I mean, for runoff and all of those types of issues, but individual property owners, I would be a little leery about that, putting the heavy on people.
I think more of a collegial work, members, the BLA and Seven Lakes or neighbors. We've noticed this, we could help you with here, we might be able to get you some professional advice how to fix an issue. And just put it out there, we're here to help.
I think voluntary compliance, honestly, because you hit the nail, you're gonna lose all trust. So when you do a lake survey again, people are gonna say, don't come
No.
on.
Yeah.
Forget it.
100%.
Yeah, so I think it's a great discussion.
Yeah,
Especially for us in Belgrade, because we do have people very passionate and educated now a little bit more about what we need to do. So anyway, that was just it's a personal opinion. but-
George Steele is joining us via Zoom. He's had his hand up for a little bit.
George, please weigh in, George. Pat Donahue here.
Hey, Pat, thank you. I have a comment and a question for the code enforcement officer. First, Richard has his job, work cut out for him because of the history of code enforcement in Belgrade, or I should say the lack of code enforcement in Belgrade. As you know, I'm chair of the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee, and last year we looked at code enforcement and compliance with Belgrade's land use ordinances. And although there was no record keeping kept at the town office, the best estimate we could come up with it for shoreline zoning as well as the other ordinance was 50% compliance. So it's hardly a level playing field, and it's basically an honor system that the history that Richard's walking into in Belgrade. So he's fighting headwinds. I mean, for some people, it's the first time they've ever encountered the code enforcement officer. The other aspect in terms of background, it's pretty clear to me that everybody on the select board is not committed to the town of Belgrade enforcing its ordinances and providing a level playing field across the board for all landowners, developers, et cetera. And that's a fundamental problem.
George,
We've even had selectmen interfere in the enforcement of ordinances when it was a buddy of theirs. So, with that background, understand where Belgrade is starting from. I mean, Belgrade is essentially starting from scratch. So my question though is relates to water quality and those aspects, at least in Belgrade's shoreline zoning ordinance that relate to water quality. And I don't know, Richard, maybe you don't have enough time under your belt yet to know the answer to this question, but when you go out and inspect projects that the Belgrade Planning Board approves, do you find that they're complying with the stormwater runoff best management practices that we require and the soil erosion control measures that we require? I mean, our long fear in the past has been that our permits are nothing but works of fiction. And I'm wondering if that's really indeed the case.
No, to answer your question, George, I find that most people are compliant with erosion control, with silt fences, etc. Thus far, I've really only had one issue where there was digging going on and there was no silt fence, but most people are compliant with it, to answer your question.
And what about stormwater runoff, like drip edge infiltration trenches and the other kinds of best management practices that Belgrade requires as a matter of course on any new structure or expansion of a structure?
I think that, yeah, there can be more work done on that as far as stormwater runoff and drip edge, especially. A lot of people aren't even familiar with that. They don't know what to do about that or what it's even all about. So that portion of it could probably be more compliant in the town in reference to the erosion control as far as comparing the two. Yeah, I think that stormwater actually needs a little bit more emphasis to the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
Go right ahead, Mike.
I think one of the simplest things that camp owners can do is just don't break up the duct. Leave the duct that breaks the limit of the water. You know what I mean?
I do.
Richard, I have a question following up on George's. When you get a new structure being permitted in the shoreline zone, as part of the plan you see is a stormwater management or on the residence or building, does it have, are we required to show what they're doing for drip edges or usually it could be gutters or some other means, around the foot of the building that when the water runs off the roof, it doesn't run to the lake, it infiltrates into the ground.
Right, and actually, the planning board's been very adamant about that, because most of the shoreline zoning permits do go to the planning board. We just had one recently, actually, where we made it very clear that they had to have the stormwater runoff
Yeah.
and, the gutters, and it had to flow into gravel, an example, pile of gravel or a hole with gravel in it. So the planning board is quite adamant about that as far as shoreline zoning goes.
So that'd be something you'd do in the course of your inspections and.
Right, yes, if I was to go back out and I would look and say, hey, how come you don't have a rain gutter up, or how come you're not managing the stormwater this way, yes.
Right, because the best thing is we don't want dirty water getting into the lake. That's just, it's kind of
Agreed.
in a nutshell what we're trying to do, what ordinances are trying to do. Anybody else have any questions for our guests?
I just had one quick comment on runoff and stormwater and stuff like that. Is, I think it's all about education, right? And because a lot of folks don't know, right? The
right.
water comes off the roof, it goes in the ground, and that's
They
it.
don't think
Try not
anything
to
of
step
it.
in the bucket, right? So, I don't know if, all the permits I've ever had to pull, I didn't have to worry about it, but is there an informational sheet for landowners that they get when they pull a permit? That maybe we even have one through Southern Lakes that kind of outlines best practices for runoff?
I don't hand out a BMP packet, so to speak,
Yeah,
but I think it would probably be a good idea. I
Yeah.
mean, and that can certainly easily be incorporated into our shoreline zoning permit and application.
Right, so they knew the whole scope of it. It's not
Right,
just
right.
your driveway, it's
Because you figure, say you hire a contractor to build an addition on your house, whatever, and they do that, they're builders, right? They build it, they're not runoff people, right?
Right.
So I think that falls on sort of the landowner, right, to either have that contractor put it in or do it themselves. And maybe a little extra information would go a long way.
And once again, our shoreline zoning, with our shoreline zoning, the permits go to the planning board, and as I said, they're quite adamant. Our planning board is about stormwater runoff as well as erosion, or many other things, but in this particular example, they're quite adamant about it. So when we have an applicant, whether it be Zoom or in person, it's always, we make it very apparent to them what they need to do, essentially to ensure that their stormwater runoff is being adequately disposed of and ensuring that their erosion is controlled. So once again, I just think that the planning board does a good job of that. However, I do agree with you, Mike, that putting a little BMP in there for a few pages or whatever with pertinent information to stormwater runoff as well as erosion control would probably be, it would be helpful.
Yeah.
Because like you said, especially with the stormwater runoff, people are ignorant of it. They just don't know. And they just think that the rain's coming off their roof and it's okay. And it's, they don't care where it goes. They don't think about it. No, I don't think anybody really does unless you're in this sort of business, Your rain comes off and it goes into the ground and then it's gone.
That's
So,
a big
I
part
think
of
that's
what
a
we
good
do with
idea.
This committee is
Yeah.
like try to figure out ways to help, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Educate.
Educate people, keep everybody in the loop. That meeting that we had with the public there, a couple weeks ago, I thought that was really good.
I do too.
I appreciate you guys being able to attend that.
I think it'd be a marvelous service if Seven Lakes would put together such a document.
But they
Like
are,
a checklist, Charlie, maybe be like a building checklist that,
That would seem like something for the planning board really to, when they give out the permit
Yeah.
to give out pamphlet that has that information.
exactly.
I thought that was in the website of the town, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe it is on the website, however, we can't expect them to, I mean, you can't expect them to go and look at the website, oh, how do we even know, but if you put it in front of their face, at least I can say, I made them aware of it, literally with paper, instead of saying, well, I told them to go to the website, I don't know if they went.
It could,
I was serious about asking Seven Lakes. They have the.
Well, we have the, I have the file, it's 50 pages long. So, so there might be a version that would be more useful
Something you want
at the town level. So,
I'm just saying, but to ask this code enforcement officer, it sounds like you don't have time to do it. Put together a document.
Oh, I don't think it would be that tough to put together a document, no. Just a little
Trying to help you out.
copy and paste, but, no, I mean, but I also, on the flip side, I'm not gonna say that, I'm not gonna do this, because I think it is important, I think Mike makes a good point to that, because as I said, especially with the stormwater runoff, people really are ignorant about it, they just don't realize it and don't consider it, so.
and making it easy is a good thing. So, if we could be helpful. Definitely let us know. I have a question for you and for Andy. I know if you're a contractor and you're working, with an excavator, you're working at the shoreline zone, you have to be trained and certified in erosion control practices. Does a builder?
Only if you're moving earth.
Only if you're moving earth. Okay.
Thank you.
A lot of buildings.
Yeah, well, in terms of training and educating the builders as well as the guys with the, excavators.
And I will say that here in Belgrade anyway, that as far as erosion control and silt fence and stuff like that, these builders know what to do, and they're doing it.
Yeah.
For the most part, except for that one particular case I just brought up a little while ago, but like I said, the stormwater runoff, that's kind of a different situation altogether, just because of the ignorance.
Well, just to, before we move on too far with the drip edges and other BMPs, that's something we don't do in Rome. As far as the planning board doesn't mandate that they put drip edges under all eaves. From time to time, it'll be a condition on the permit, but it's a good idea. I like your checklist idea. And I would actually take it one step further. So you could have like an information packet that you give them, but you could have just some conditions of approval that you hand out with basically every single permit. And those conditions of approval, one of them being, you must have at least a 6-inch deep by 2-foot wide drip edge around, or whatever your ordinance says. We don't have anything that specifies that, so we'd basically be inventing it in Rome. We're looking at DEP's BMP requirements. But so if they had that, more or less a checklist of conditions of approval, when you do the certificate of occupancy for the structure, you could go right down that list as a CEO and check them right off. Did they get it? Did they get it? Oh, didn't get that one. Can't give you your certificate of occupancy until you get that done.
that's a good one.
So it would just be, so that that's kind of the stopgap to make sure that everything has been done is that certificate of occupancy. And that's where you could really make sure that all those things do get taken care of. Silt fences or, the erosion control, that's kind of the low hanging fruit as far as when the site starts getting worked on, the excavator guy comes in. All of them are well trained, they've had it beaten into them, that they gotta have that stuff up. That happens, it's towards the end of the project, and everyone wants to move into that thing, that they start cutting costs on landscaping, and that's where you miss all those drip edges and gutters, things like that. So that's a good point. I wrote that down. I'm gonna see if I can incorporate that in the room somehow.
Could you do that in your building permit? You don't have to do an ordinance for that, right?
Again, you could do it as a condition, and I would probably, so if somebody ever wanted to appeal your decision because they said, oh, your condition is not backed up by the law, so I don't need to do that. You could always refer back to the very end of the chapter 1000 guidelines. Section 15, it tells you all the different things as far as 100 feet back and this is what you can cut for trees, blah, blah, blah. You get into section 16, it's all about administration, and it gives you like big bullet points, like the project will not cause adverse erosion into the lake, something like that. They're big, large, broad spectrum stuff. So you could always point to that and say, well, it says
This is how we implement
you
that.
can't cause erosion, so this is how we are making you not cause erosion. So I think you could back it up if they
Yeah.
appeal. So I think you wouldn't have to, long story short, you wouldn't need to change the ordinance. You could just, as long as it was within reason of protecting the lake, and you could add them as conditions and just do it. rather than
We
wait
could do
for
it in
town
the
meeting.
shoreline zone, we could do it throughout the watershed, or, you know.
Probably just shoreline zone, because I don't have the shoreline zoning ordinance is only good for 250 feet of the water, and that's where those are cited. I don't have anything to hang my hat on outside shoreline zone, other than erosion sediment control.
Right.
But that is, during construction, not down the road after construction. So as long as they stabilize the site with like a grass and other piece,
Mhm.
it's stable, it would meet the erosion sediment control law. So.
Okay.
So, yes,
And one thing that we've done just recently, we did with a permit is we accomplished that via the findings of fact with the, I'm having a brain cramp. The findings of fact conditions, there we go. So we had one that we specified the conditions for the sewage runoff. And so that kind of covered that area, and so as to kind of alluding to the question about whether we needed an ordinance or not, I mean, I think it's kind of covered for us in the conditions, in the findings of fact.
Right.
Yes. And so once again, the planning board does a very good job of ensuring that in the conditions, we make sure that those are gonna be met when they do what they're doing.
Speaking of storm runoff issues, I don't know if this falls under code enforcement, though perhaps it should. What about road ditching? And by that, I mean town road ditching that is done by the roads crew, the town roads crew, which is a problem. And last fall, up on McGraw Pond Road, there was some ditching done, and it has still been left as raw dirt. So every time there's a good rain, it's washing raw dirt into McGraw Pond. And if that were private land, code enforcement should be all over them, but it's actually town roads.
I would think that would fall under DOT and DEP myself.
Well,
That would be my guess, just because of what you just said about it being private or public.
yeah, I don't know.
Why don't you have jurisdiction over that? You do,
Over public roads?
public road, sure.
It's a Belgrade road, yeah. I'm not saying, I don't know that he does. I'm not suggesting that you do. I don't know if you do or not.
I think you do, I think you'll look into it, see if you do have a jurisdiction.
But well, it's more, really, the question is why our roads commissioner is not on top of that. I've spoken with the town manager about that, and he says he really can't do very much, that the roads commissioner does not. So,
report to the select board.
so it's like, yeah.
So you're a road commissioner, Jason Stevens, right?
Yeah.
Jason is he's an excellent contractor. I like
Yeah.
working with Jason when he's doing private stuff.
Yeah.
But I would think he'd be receptive to, hey, we got an issue, can you get that fixed, or, I don't know.
I don't know, perhaps I, but I don't know why he hasn't done anything.
Yeah.
He was notified of the problem last fall, but he's not done anything, it's still raw dirt there.
I would think you don't have to start threatening him. With Jason, you can talk to him.
Mm.
Yeah, and perhaps coming from the CEO, that conversation might carry some weight.
So,
Yeah,
Worth trying anyway.
He's definitely approachable. I was just doing a sewer inspection for him this morning. He's certainly approachable, and actually, most recently, we had a complaint where he was sweeping dirt, and there was a huge pile in front of somebody's, I don't know, the driveway or the yard, or was kicking onto the grass, and he went over immediately and took care of that. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you're lying, but I don't know why you wouldn't be receptive to that. However, I think it should be approached again. He should be approached, sure, about that. You said McGraw, that was on McGraw Pond Road?
McGraw Pond Road, yeah, just as you're heading up towards Oakland, it's up over the crest of the hill, and then just as the hill starts down. The sort of the highest point of McGraw Pond Road and just as it starts to go down before it levels out. Do you know where that is?
I have a rough idea.
Yeah, and then after it levels out, and then at the end of that level area, that's where the Oakland line is. So it's on the way down that hill, that it's all the ditching and the rock. So I can try giving him a call, see if I can. So I mean, I just don't know if he's doing that in other places in town.
Is he the one actually doing the work, or they just hire it out, sub it out?
I think his people, I think his guys are doing the work.
Oh.
I think.
You know, he has a crew.
Like I said, I've worked with Jason since I've done this job, and he's usually excellent to work with. I've had issues with him as far as like the erosion control is not installed properly. And I call him up and it's fixed like that. So probably just a conversation with him and get it, we're taking care of it.
Yeah, George Shields got another comment or question.
George, please
Thank
come
you,
on.
Pat. I would just remind everybody that amongst the recommendations in the various watershed management plans, there's a series of remediation recommendations, and I'm not familiar with all of them, but the two I've looked at, Long Pond and Great Pond, both highlight dealing with both town and DOT erosion problems, primarily in the ditching and the direct discharge to streams. And so that's an opportunity to deal with this on a kind of holistic approach, which I guess your committee will be dealing with at some point. At least that's my understanding from Anthony.
I'm working with Jason on a couple of projects right now on roads, but they're all in Belgrade Village. One's Hoolan Road. He and I are looking at another road Friday. So yeah, so there, and I second what Andy said, that Jason is usually very responsive, but inevitably you do a lot of ditching. The crew doesn't put in hay at the end of the day, and it may not get done for, like you said, for a month or more. So it's it's good to be alert and give feedback, because I think he's more responsive than many.
That's been my
Yeah.
experience with Jason.
That's why I think the conversation from you would be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Someone's been noted.
I don't have any issue with that.
Anything more for our two guests here today?
I have one thing.
Yes,
Um,
yes, go right ahead, Paul.
So before we wind up, it's my impression is that I guess we're between a rock and a hard place, is that we see the need for further shoreline code enforcement. But as explained to me, particularly with George's comments about the present situation politically in Belgrade and the history that we've had in Belgrade, that it is unlikely that it would get a code enforcement officer would be funded to be able to do this. And also, as a practical matter, Richard is pretty much not available. So I think we need to look at other resources, and I'm curious to ask Andy again if he can quickly go through, is there a way that, a ombudsman for the lake could be created? How this committee might go forward to try and research or put together an effort to have, I guess, a new position that maybe it's through 7LA. I don't know. Have you thought any further about this, Andy, how it might be able to be done?
Not really. So I mean, I think an interlocal agreement between whatever towns around the lake are going to participate in it. And that interlocal agreement is to hire a code enforcement officer with a focus on shoreland zoning issues. It's really how we integrate that into the other issues that happen within those towns. So a lot of times there'll be multiple. For example, a new camp gets built in the shoreland zone. Well, not only is it a shoreline zoning issue, it's also a plumbing inspector issue. It might be a road commissioner issue. They need a new driveway. So there's a lot of overlap between all this stuff. So it's really just a matter of figuring out how we can create, I guess, a deputy code officer or something that works, shoreland zoning focused, but can also work with the code officers in those towns. I don't
Who
think
would
it's impossible. In fact, I think it's pretty easy. It's just a matter of doing it and working out the kinks.
So who would the officer work for?
The towns. So he would be part-time for multiple towns.
Okay,
I think you need, my guess is you need that to have the authority to enforce.
Correct,
That
yeah,
it needs to be
Yeah.
tied to the town rather than a nonprofit or something
yeah,
like that.
that's exactly right.
They can go advise.
They'd probably need an office, or would they have space in each town's code enforcement space?
Yeah, they probably would need a central office somewhere, but then they can also work out of other offices.
Yeah.
They're gonna need to dig through the tax files in every town office and so on and so forth. But you'd want a dedicated space where whatever projects you're working on, you don't have to shove them in a file every single moment you leave, so.
Yeah,
Mike has a
I want
question.
to piggyback on what Paul was just saying with a question. In the town of Belgrade, no offense, no, our budget, the reason why Anthony probably told you we can't extend your hours is because the budget's been approved and that's what we have for the year, et cetera. So a big part of the conversation has been, do we double up somehow with a shoreline zoning person, or do we add hours for you, et cetera? What's the process in the town to try to get funds approved for more hours for the current code enforcement?
First thing you have to do is get the select board to go along with it. They have to put the article on the warrant.
And what's the process to make that happen?
Approach them. Now, the other possibility, you submit a petition.
Yeah,
If they refuse, you get the requisite number of signatures, and then they have to take it, assuming it's written properly. Whatever.
right.
But it starts with approaching the select board and saying, we would like to see funding raised to do such and such. Make him full-time or get an interlocal agreement, whatever.
I think that the select board would be more receptive than we're giving them credit for. At least a majority of them would, and by a majority, I mean 60%,
Three of them,
3 of the 5, which is all you
which
really
is
need.
what you need now.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it still starts, somebody's got to make the request, somebody's got to bring it to them and say, we'd like to have this done, or maybe this committee should do
Well,
that.
that's what I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, maybe we should jot that down for one of our next meetings. We have
Yeah.
time. When's the budget approval process?
Yeah, that doesn't start until the
Yeah.
fall, right?
Yeah,
Right, so, but it is something that I think we should talk about, because everybody's
Yeah.
sort of saying the same thing. We're getting creative in conversation with how to do it. But
what about, I understand there's gonna be 3 public meetings in June for the ARPA funds. Might this, a pilot program idea that this be a pilot and see if this works with ARPA funds? Is that a possibility?
ARPA.
That's for, you know, the
Those,
COVID.
I agree with you. I don't think you hear me. Oh, wait.
Good idea, Paul.
It's a good idea. I think those ARPA funds have been requested, 150 times over so far. And I don't even think they've hit our account yet, but in town.
Sure.
But no, there are funds available, you know what I mean? But there's a process, especially in our town, to try to get there.
I think we need something that's more permanent,
Yeah.
a long-term commitment,
But I, you know, if a pilot program is the only way to get it off the ground,
Yeah.
so be it.
We're just getting educated to the need.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Do the fees in Belgrade cover the cost of the code enforcement? Does anybody know the accounting on it?
I don't
I was
know.
just curious, because
So,
that was always a question in Mount Vernon. I used to be treasurer there, and that was always, this is a long time ago. But that was always the question is, can we pay for it? And so we raised the fees one time in order to pay for the CEO. So how about, do you know
No,
how
they
it works?
don't even come close in Rome as far as covering costs.
Yeah.
I mean, I typically, so Rome actually just went up on all of their fee structures because they found out they were significantly low compared to other surrounding towns, especially when you start comparing to like cities, like you go to a Waterville or something,
CEO
get a
has,
permit.
CEO has a budget in the warrant every year. so
Right.
Guarantees don't cover.
No, they don't even come close. So they like doubled the fees over in Rome recently, because we looked at how much fees they brought in last year and it was like $1,500 or something. Don't quote me on the number, but it wasn't terribly high.
Yeah, those are the fees for application.
So those are applications.
Not,
Not violations.
violations.
But they try to shy away from having violations paid for because then.
I agree, yeah,
Right.
yeah, I think we all know where that's going.
Exactly. How can we find today?
Right, you, I got you, I got you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But, and, you know, because I hear, you know, to do the job in certain ways, you just don't have time to do it. And yet, if you feel it's important, you know, building that fee structure into getting the permit is one way to think about it too. I mean, there's also, to everybody's benefit, so you can also take it out of taxes, because everybody wants to keep the lakes in good shape. But another way to do it is to, you know, put, you know, most of it on the person asking for the permit. Anyway, there's different ways to skin the cat.
Yeah, it's a little tricky with hooking it to permits too, though, because the building cycle does this, so, you know,
Right.
it's been crazy for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Wait another year or two, and
Right.
we're gonna see building permits dropping off. Last year I issued double the building permits in Rome that I do for a typical year. Just crazy.
Yeah.
And this year I am down 75% right now
Mhm.
for building permits compared to last year. So you're gonna see such a fluctuation in the amounts that you.
And that makes it hard to keep CEOs too, because I mean, that also affects your hours, you know?
It does.
Yeah, because if you have half the work,
That's
you
right.
know, it should be a full-time job at that level and it makes it tough.
Then again, that's not the CEO's whole job.
What's
No.
that?
It's not his whole job, it's the permits, he's got the outlook.
Right.
That's one of the things that I think these meetings have really sort of educated me on is, I didn't know what your jobs were, really. You know, I really didn't know, I don't know what to do every day. But there's a lot more to it than I think Joe Public knows, right?
And we haven't even, we only touched a little bit
A
of
little
it.
bit,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah.
We're just
Yeah.
touching
The
our
list goes
little,
on, you
our
know.
little sliver. We
Yeah.
didn't, you know, just locating the
like
numbers on the
building code
home
and
takes a
like
lot of
safety
time. How many
code.
hours would that usually take you?
Oh, it depends on how far I have to walk. I had to do one last week where I had to walk 2,500 feet, you know, in both directions. So however long that takes, you know, to get this person addressed.
Then
way
come back
down
in and
Camp
put it
Road.
in?
Yeah, and then come back here and spend 10 minutes putting it in the system or so. Then you gotta wait and see if it gets rejected or accepted by the state. Then you gotta fill out the E911 form for the post office and bring it down there and give it to the post office, so. Then you gotta notify the person that you notified the post office.
It's like, don't forget the assessor, you gotta notify them too,
Oh, yeah.
the new
You
address.
can't lose, can't
I
beat the
think part of the
assessor.
problem is most people, especially I think some people, don't understand how Maine municipalities work. I've been dressed down by a member of the BOA, as a matter of fact, because the town did not give enough money to support the lakes. We gave all that the town gave us. They did not understand it. They just figured we had a bucket of money in the back and we should be dipping into it to give more money to protect the lakes. But that's only one example. There are other people that feel, you know, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? We can only do what we're given permission by the town to do, town meeting to do. And only the amount of money. We can't spend more than the amount of money that they've allotted for us. So that's different even than Oakland as a council. Different certainly than New York City or Freeport or some of these other big towns.
A lot.
Richard, one quick question. Approximately, ballpark, what percentage of your time do you spend on issues, structures, work being done in shoreland zone as opposed to non-shoreland zone? Is it 20%,
No.
40%?
Higher than that. I would say, and let me clarify, are you speaking about like a site evaluation, say there's a building permit out? And
Oh, I
wanna
mean,
check
sure,
on it?
sure, anything from shoreland zone to the water, that would include docks and things as well. But yeah, yes, right. Bill,
Yeah, I would say 60 to 70% is dedicated to shoreline, probably.
oh,
And-
really? That much?
Yes,
And
and
only,
that's where most of the building in Belgrade is going on right now.
okay,
That's
so
why
only,
all the
only
expansion-
30 to 40% for the whole rest of the town. I didn't realize there's other
Rough
stuff.
guesstimate, but
Yeah, rough.
yeah.
That's what I asked for.
And
So it is a
and
big part.
I think, yeah, so I would say the majority anyway is spent shoreline, and that's where really all the building, expanding, et cetera, is going on right now.
Okay, very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Which is almost exactly what your tax base number is. It's
Yeah.
somewhere around 60, 65%.
Okay, yep. Interesting, I would not have guessed it that much, but it makes sense, now the way you explained it.
Is that true in Rome too, is most,
There's more.
more?
80%
Yes.
of valuation,
Tax base.
yeah, tax base. But I'd say time-wise, similar, 60-70% shoreline zoning issues or shoreline properties.
Because one of the challenges of like a committee like this for the town is we're trying to move things forward, you know what I mean, in a good way for all the people in towns. But enforcement always comes up in everything you discuss. Well, I don't want to meet for an hour and a half, talk about something that doesn't have any way of enforcement behind it.
Right.
Enforcement doesn't have to be negative, right?
Yeah.
It's just, that's how it works for everybody. So knowing what you all do really helps us kind of funnel into what we need to focus on. Because I don't want to focus on stuff that turns out to be unenforceable, or, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that was something that we had a big discussion with the mooring ordinance, right? Was who's gonna do that, right? Who's gonna enforce that?
That was
And
always
how
the
is somebody
question.
gonna enforce that? Where's the money gonna come from? And all of those normal process questions.
Whose boat are they gonna use?
Whose boat are they gonna use? Right, and they're not using my boat, no. So anyway, I just think these meetings, while I know they take everybody's time, it's really informative. So I appreciate
This
I
that.
mean, if
been-
you're able to make a recommendation to, increase the hours, that could be a significant help.
Dang straight,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I don't think there's any question.
That's why I was
Yeah.
thrilled when I saw the agenda.
Yeah, without more time and focus, we can't do anymore.
Right.
You're maxed out now with what you have to do here already, but you can't probably squeeze in the busy season any more inspections in a day or extra work or.
No,
No.
Really
Straight
appreciate
up.
what you guys do.
this is the easiest way to say it. No,
Yeah.
I mean, time is not on Andy's nor my side.
Yeah, you're both very busy. If anybody walks in there to get a permit, sometimes a couple
Yeah, they
of
think
people hit them.
that they're waiting for the permit.
Yeah, no, it's a lot to it once
Right.
it's
There's
presented.
spot on.
Yeah, they think that people are being permits here, they really think that you're sitting on this, waiting for the permit to stamp it and move it on.
Yeah, that's just the beginning. They're looking at it. Do we have any more questions for our guests?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for coming in today.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
And
appreciate it.
if you ever need me back or if you have something to discuss, you know where to
Well,
find me.
thank you. We'll keep you in the loop here in some of these interlocal agreements, and we'll pick your brain again for some of the other
For
stuff.
what it's worth.
Thank you, Andy.
you around later?
Thank you.
I will be, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And,
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a guest who wanted to talk about his dock issue.
My name is Shane Chapu. I live down on the Woodland Camp Road, permanent resident down there year round.
Which road or where is it?
The Woodland Camp Road, so it's the end of the Point Road down by Camp Roya.
Okay, yep.
So you turn left at the end and right by my place. Right, Kimberly's my name. First off, I gotta thank, I guess, this committee and the town for putting forth the mooring ordinance and passing it, because I think it's a step in the right direction as far as what the intention, me reading it, I guess I can interpret my own intention or whatever. Briefly, what my situation is with me, I've got a neighbor that Richard's been down and looked at their dock placement and their boat lift and 3 jet ski placement. And if I had to estimate, I have 150 feet of lake shore. 40 feet of lake shore that's closest to them is unusable because their dock comes right off at the corner, at the pin, basically, and starts to directly angle up in front of my property. So all 3 lifts and every section of the dock except half of their first is in my mooring zone. If I was to take your ordinance and say, if I extended my property lines, which I did, I actually walked out in the water, took a string off my property line. Some people thought it was tedious, and I think it's being explained, to be able to explain the situation. And everything they own is in my mooring zone. I can't even, my dock that sits, that I normally put my pontoon boat at, I normally would take on a day that I'm gonna come in and put fuel on it, put it on the other end of my dock. And I've done that for the 5, this will be my 6th summer here. Now I can't even get my boat, I can barely get my boat to my dock without hitting their lift, let alone.
Is
To
there
the other
some,
side.
is there some reason why they don't just put their dock straight out? Do they have constraints?
No, they've had their dock straight out last year. They actually moved it over closer to where they had it. So I guess, I guess what the reason I came is because I wanted you guys to see an example of what maybe could be done better, and maybe the interpretation of things, like a boat lift. A boat lift sits adjacent to the dock. It's not attached to the dock. In my interpretation, any type of lift is some type of a mooring. It's just a dry mooring. It's not a wet mooring. If I had, that's my view of it. So if this ordinance is designed to protect my mooring zone, each property has a mooring zone, then I think it should include more things such as docks, rather than just an anchor out in the water with a white and blue striped buoy. And I've taken, I welcome any of you, if you want to come down to my house and walk over there and look at the property line and see what I would deem egregious, you're more than welcome. I brought photos on my iPad, but I just think that the mooring ordinance could be improved drastically.
Have you spoken with your neighbor about this?
We currently have litigation in other aspects going on, and that's being dealt with by a lawyer.
So this is,
For other issues, I won't even go into them, but permits that were issued, roads that are closed, other sorts of things. So there's some discontent between us and them, because they don't want to be legally challenged, so therefore they're gonna do this.
Do you think they'd move their dock over, away from your property line to more?
Do I think they would?
Yeah.
No,
This sounds like a sour grapes thing, like I'm just gonna move my dock that way. 'cause-
their dock was over, you have to understand, there's people in the world that think when they buy something, they bought a lake shore with 90 feet of frontage. So they try to stretch that lake shore into 150 feet of frontage by taking their dock and putting it on the end and angling it out this way. And to the point where I can't use even 40, if I wanted to deem my right to take a dock and put it open there, stick it out. You have to look at the pictures to come see it, because to me, it's egregious. It's not being petty. But
How is that? That's a sad story. I'm sorry.
It's kind of not. That's the problem.
That's, yeah.
There, like Andy said, we don't have a legal foothold on this because we do not have an ordinance that specifies docks. So in Mr. Chapu's case, I convinced the manager of that property next door to move the ski lift and the jet ski portion of it, as well as the boat lift to the other side, their side.
Yeah.
Which should free up, I don't know how much of Mr. Chapu's, but it'd be, a lot closer to his pin on their side. However, technically, they don't even have to do that. So, if you went to court, they'd say, well, where's the paperwork on it? And so I think that he's right. And as I said before, I think we need to come up with a dock, either dock ordinance or incorporate into the mooring ordinance with such language specifying the dock situation encroaching upon other people's property. But as of right now, I have no legal basis to stand.
Really interesting, because what's that old saying, nobody wants to like, whatever.
Right.
And so courtesy out the window.
Yeah.
And so now you have to look at it again, right back to that enforcement
Mhm.
part. The state probably doesn't have, I'm trying to think, I'm rattling my brain. I don't think
Most
there's
city-
anything on the state with the state either. is there?
I've always kind of anticipated as technology grows, and technology is not your iPad, it's the ability to build a lightweight dock that can be easily put together. I mean, all of us probably remember back in the 80s, we had, pressure treated, and like
Pressure
3 or
treated,
4 of
yeah.
us lugged it, put it in, and you made them small because it was too heavy. Now these can go out and easily moved, and some of maybe the traditions of neighborliness are missing in some areas of some individuals where normally would never thought to put it on a property line. It's kind of.
Why can't we consider to revise at another meeting, this ordinance and make a recommendation to the select board that a dock we consider to be part of we can expand this and look at this.
Well, I think this should be a planning board issue more than a select board.
It's got to be, this is something that the select board has to approve to go back to the voter.
Well, they have to have something to approve from the planning board, I guess is what I was saying. So
No,
as I was saying, I agree. I think that we should either incorporate it into the mooring ordinance or develop just a dock ordinance, one or the other.
Yeah.
It could easily be inclusive of the mooring ordinance.
That's
We
what
just
you
have to come up with some
I'm
language.
suggesting it be part of
Move the dock over
the-
and then have to put this piece in. And then-
I think it's part of our mission in the Lake Committee.
I guess, the reason I came and I have to run because my daughter's visiting and I'm not gonna take any of her time away. But I would like to see this committee, you did a great thing. But I think there could be improvements for this type of situation. If law allows you to take a piece of a mooring zone, as the state does, and that's what you guys did, you get your mooring zone. It's the same thing for a docking zone. If somebody owns 50 feet of lakeshore, their toys and things that they put out in lakeshore, because next thing you're gonna run into is what's gonna stop these people from putting a little stuff dock out and then put 200 feet of dock right on my property?
Right.
Same essence. And they say, well, I'm putting my boat list right there. I'm 50 feet out, you don't own the water. Whether it's an angle or whether- That's the next thing to come. You got a houseboat now, next thing you know, you got 200 feet of dock horizontal across your property.
I think there's no problem, if this committee so desires, to make a recommendation that something, that ordinance be modified.
Well,
It doesn't necessarily have to go to the planning board.
Well, but be careful in that all that has to be approved, I believe, would have to be approved by the voters
Yes.
Yes.
as an ordinance, yeah.
Even if it does, you guys are the guys that suggest that to them.
That's what we're here for, is lake issues,
And I-
lake related issues.
I appreciate the work you guys do.
And this is certainly
I
quality of life.
I was
issue.
born in this town, raised in this town.
Okay.
I worked for Dexter Goodrich at Pinehurst Camps when I was a kid. It was my life dream to move back here and live on the water. Now I'm living this nightmare with these people next door.
And that-
What lake do you want?
Great one. I used to work over at Foster's Point, Vern Foster, used to
Yeah.
caretake over there.
No, these are the kind of issues that are in the purview of
This
this
one's
committee.
tricky though, right?
It's
Because
tricky.
This is gonna be, would it be an M&A thing? Would it be I don't know who the,
It's more like the
Governing body
placement of them,
is.
if that dock was put 15 feet from the property line, like a building permit would have to be, you can only go, if it matched what we do for buildings in the shoreland zone,
Right.
that might be an appropriate demarcation.
But even then, you always have to think of worst case scenario when you make an ordinance.
Right.
So the same thing, it's like, put a piece straight out and then go 200 feet that way, and there's nothing legally that tells me that I can't,
So
because I don't have any right to the,
it's maybe length.
but that's just kind of the situation that I'm in, and believe me, I'll deal with it,
I've seen others in your situation, just as I drive around the lake, I go, look at that.
But I
Somebody's-
welcome anybody, if you want to come down and take a look, you're more than welcome.
That falls into the same sort of category, I think, as folks that put ropes out in front of their.
Like a swimming
For a
area.
swimming
Yeah,
area and stuff like that.
Now, there's
Yeah.
actually, you can't do that. That's,
Right.
it's actually
You have to permit.
yeah, you need a
Yeah,
permit.
and
do
you have to
that.
get the right ropes and the signage and when that was happening, yeah, it happened twice on Westlinsky a couple of years ago. And that's how I found out that you can't do that.
Right.
This sounds like something similar though, like it's.
Well,
matter of-
like I said, you can do that. You have to get a permit and in getting a permit, you are required to allow anyone to go swimming there. Anybody who walks up can go swimming there.
That was what made
Because-
them pull the ropes out,
Yeah,
was that
right.
part of the.
Yeah, because the only reason that that is allowed is for public swimming.
These folks just didn't want people fishing in front of their dock.
It'd be easy enough to draft an ordinance that basically says, dock's gotta go out at 90 degrees. Any exception needs a permit. You know, you have to allow some exception, because there are situations where they need to.
Sure, I totally agree.
It doesn't have to be an involved ordinance, it'd be as simple as that, I would think.
Well,
But that's-
Well, depends how the shoreline is too.
Yeah,
Because
That would be the exception.
Shoreline can be,
Yeah,
When
that
against
that can get
the
tricky.
routine and then the 90 degrees will encroach in some other property.
So it needs a little more thought than I just laid on, but the thing is, it doesn't have to be a big involved ordinance.
How-
And I think we could probably we could probably exert that authority, because we have the authority to do the mooring law.
what, I think we could go through the same procedure we did with the mooring ordinance, kind of come up with, a strong man for it. We have public hearings on it. We'll select board approval of what our basic plan is, and, get the input from others. How big do you think this dock goes out? How many feet?
My dock is 50 feet. I'd say it's close to 100.
That's a long way out from fish,
Yeah.
your guide,
I can catch 7, 8 fish off that.
but I mean, as a kayaker, if I'm down there, then you hit a dock, a dock is kind of like cutting your trip in two, or a swimmer who doesn't want to go way out 100 feet. In the old way, you never had much went over 40 feet probably.
I'm just wondering if you've done by chance any Googling up research on some other places that have had this.
I Googled dock mooring ordinances.
Yeah,
in
stuff like
Maine,
that.
And there's a couple, one of them, like this gentleman said about all docks must be 15 feet off the pin, so you start from there. And it was nothing real specific, but more in line with the same thing with the what's the word I'm trying to think of? The meaning of the mooring ordinance of you're preserving my zone. This is like, like in Kimberly's case, they've got a lot more lakeshore than mine. Even at the very end of their lakeshore, it's still their lakeshore that they pay lake property taxes on. It's still not right for somebody to come up there and use or do or whatever. She pays more taxes than me, but still deserves to exercise the same rights as everybody else. It's when you get into this situation where people are trying to do or take more than they actually have the right to do. And that's where I see this going,
One of the things that have to be established in order for this to go anywhere is we have to know there's more situations than yours.
Right.
Because at the first thing, it's like, we're doing, say, why should we do this for one person? I've heard him say that over and over again, different situations. So we'd have to check to see, be able to go and say, we got 25 situations like this, or whatever it is. And some of them more egregious than others, maybe some pictures, and then I think we could get a list of them. So that's something perhaps you could help us with.
if anybody's got an issue, just send them my way.
I'll come down and look at it,
Okay.
just for,
I mean,
not as an enforcement thing, just to
Yeah, just so
understand it.
that-
Yeah,
I mean, you can look at pictures on my iPad, but if you
Yeah,
take
you
a
really
drive
want to see it.
down and really see what the situation is.
you're down, think I'm
No, on Woodland
Woodland
Camp,
Camp,
Point Road down towards
I
Alphonse,
know where it is.
very end, take a left, And it's the first red roof on the left-hand side.
We have one.
I have to run. I
Thank you.
appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you very much.
Well, again, this will be a topic of discussion for committee, for sure.
And,
Probably take some time, but it's.
right, you guys have my contact information. If you need information or stuff I can help with, I'm more than welcome to do whatever I can do.
We just have one more agenda item. approval.
Johnson.
2 minutes. Minutes,
Yes, I move we approve them.
I hear a second.
Yeah, second.
All those in favor? Approved. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for the minutes. It was very informative.
Way to remember the housekeeping part.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Adjourned.
Yeah, we got. Yeah, things change.
Thanks very much for coming by. I appreciate it.
Trying to get rid of the-
Important stuff.
Yeah, it's good to have you guys there.
There you go. See you.
No, right. that's not-
Yeah, I wanted to see the discussion with Andy and with Richard